They found a shipwreck, but it wasn't supposed to exist. It was late autumn in the year 1957 when a group of marine surveyors working off the coast of Maine stumbled upon something that defied every known record, something buried beneath layers of silt and kelp cradled by the cold Atlantic floor. The vessel, partially collapsed but unmistakably intact in sections, lay at a depth of nearly 200 feet just beyond the continental shelf near Monhegan Island. What made the discovery so unnerving wasn't merely its condition, it was the design. The hull bore no resemblance to any documented ship from the colonial era, nor did it match the blueprints of early American fishing vessels or merchant schooners. Its structure was sleek, almost futuristic for its time, with riveted plating arranged in an unusual spiral pattern and portholes shaped like ovals rather than circles. Most peculiar of all, there were no markings, no name, no registry number, nothing to suggest where it came from or who had sailed her. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? The team, led by Silas Thorne, a wiry, weather-beaten oceanographer with salt-crusted boots and a permanent squint from years spent scanning horizons, had been mapping the seabed for potential oil deposits when their sonar picked up an anomaly. At first, they assumed it was a submerged rock formation, perhaps an ancient glacial deposit left behind by retreating ice sheets. But as the remote-operated camera descended through the murky water, the image on the monitor shifted from shadow to shape and then, suddenly, into undeniable form. A ship. Not just any ship, but one that looked as though it had been placed there deliberately, like a secret meant to stay hidden. Silas leaned forward in his chair aboard the research vessel Auriga, his breath catching in his throat. "Back it up," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "Just a few feet, let's get a wider angle." The technician obeyed, guiding the submersible drone backward. And there, illuminated in the beam of its spotlight, the full silhouette emerged long, narrow, with a prow that curved upward like the beak of some prehistoric bird. No sails, no smokestacks. Just smooth metal, stained green with corrosion, yet still holding its shape after decades, perhaps centuries, beneath the waves. "What in God's name?" murmured Elric Voss, the expedition's lead historian, a man whose knowledge of maritime archaeology spanned 3 continents. He adjusted his glasses, peering at the screen as if trying to decipher a dream. "That isn't 18th century. Not even close. Look at the bow. There's no reinforcement for ramming, no figurehead mount. This isn't built for wind, it's built for speed." The date was November 12th, 1957. The sky above the Auriga was overcast, heavy with the promise of winter storms. Waves slapped against the hull with a steady rhythm, and the air smelled of brine and diesel. Inside the cramped control cabin, tension hummed like a live wire. Every eye was fixed on the monitor, every breath seemed too loud. They sent the drone closer, the camera swept across the deck, or what remained of it. Hatches were sealed shut, fused by time and pressure. One side of the ship had caved inward, likely from implosion or collision, but the other remained surprisingly intact. Then, as the light passed over a recessed panel near the stern, something glinted. Not metal, glass, crystal? The technician zoomed in. Embedded in the hull was a circular window, thick, convex, and darkened with age, but behind it, faintly, something shimmered. A reflection. Or perhaps movement? "No," Elric whispered. "That's impossible. Could be sediment shifting?" Someone offered, though their voice wavered. Silas didn't respond. He stared, unblinking. Because for a fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, he thought he saw a shape pass behind the glass. A silhouette. Human? Not quite. Too tall. Too still. They pulled the drone back immediately. Protocol demanded caution. Unknown wrecks could be unstable, even dangerous. But curiosity, once ignited, is not easily quenched. That night, aboard the Auriga, the crew gathered in the mess hall, steaming mugs in hand, voices hushed, logs were reviewed, charts studied. No vessel matching the description had ever been reported missing in those waters. No distress calls, no sightings, nothing. And yet, there it was. Over the next 3 days, they launched 2 more dives. Each time, the images grew clearer. Inside the ship, via a breached section near the midship, the camera revealed corridors narrow, sloping downward at a slight incline, lined with smooth walls that looked almost molded, not welded. There were no ladders, no handrails. Instead, shallow grooves ran along the floor, as if designed for bare feet or something else entirely. Instruments mounted on the walls resembled dials, but their markings were alien circles within triangles, symbols that bore no relation to any known language. One device, partially intact, emitted a faint hum when the drone's light touched it, a vibration so low it was felt more than heard, resonating through the submersible's frame. Elric spent hours comparing the findings to classified naval projects, Cold War prototypes, even rumored Soviet stealth crafts. Nothing fit. The materials alone, alloys later identified as a titanium-zirconium composite, were not in use until the 1980s. How had such a ship ended up at the bottom of the Atlantic in what appeared to be a state of preservation far exceeding its age? Then came the photograph. On the fourth dive, the drone captured an image inside what might have been a control room. In the center stood a pedestal topped with a translucent sphere, cracked but still glowing with a soft internal light blue, pulsing faintly like a slow heartbeat. Around it, 6 seats were arranged in a semicircle, each molded to the shape of a body, but not a human body. The limbs were elongated, the spine curved unnaturally, the headrests were too large, too high. Silas refused to believe it. It's erosion, he insisted. Water distortion, trick of the light. But Elric knew better. He had seen cave paintings in France that depicted beings with stars for eyes. He had read declassified documents about Project Sign, about pilots who spoke of disc-shaped objects over New Mexico in 1947. This was different. This was physical, tangible, buried, yes, but waiting. The decision was made to bring up a sample. A small fragment of the hull, carefully extracted using hydraulic cutters. It was placed in a sealed container, stored in the ship's lab. That night, the temperature aboard the Auriga dropped without explanation. Crewmen reported hearing whispers in the ventilation shafts, soft, rhythmic, not in any language they recognized. One sailor, Jorvik Menet, swore he saw a reflection in the porthole of his cabin, not his own, but a face, long and pale, watching him from the dark water outside. By morning, the fragment was gone. Not stolen, not misplaced, vanished. The container was intact, locked, undamaged, but inside, empty. Only a fine dust remained, clinging to the sides like ash. Panic began to spread. The captain ordered the mission aborted. They would return to port, file a report with the Navy, and let others decide what to do. But as the Auriga turned east toward Rockland Harbor, the sonar pinged again, this time not from below, but from behind. Something was rising from the wreck, slowly, deliberately. Silas rushed to the deck. The sea was calm, the sky breaking into pale streaks of dawn. But beneath the surface, a disturbance formed a column of bubbles, spiraling upward like a vortex. And then, for just a moment, the water shimmered, as if refracting light from an unseen source. A low tone echoed through the hull, deep and resonant, vibrating the bones of everyone on board. No one spoke, no one moved, and then, silence. When they reached shore, the official report cited equipment malfunction, sonar misinterpretation, and possible geological activity. The footage was classified, the logs were sealed, the crew dispersed, some transferred, others retiring abruptly. Silas Thorne submitted a detailed addendum, only to have it returned with a single sentence stamped across the cover. Information not consistent with established records. He never spoke of it again, not publicly. But in the attic of his cottage in Boothbay Harbor, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, he kept a notebook. Pages filled with sketches, coordinates, and one haunting phrase repeated over and over, as if trying to convince himself it wasn't supposed to be there, it wasn't supposed to exist. Years passed. The story faded into rumor told in hushed tones at coastal bars, scribbled in the margins of obscure journals. Some claimed the wreck resurfaced during a storm in 1973, seen by lobstermen off Matnicus Isle. Others said the Navy recovered it in secret, towing it under cover of fog to a facility in Portsmouth. A few even believed the ship was never human at all, that it had arrived from somewhere else, crash landing in the ocean long before history began recording names and dates. Elric Voss, in his final interview before passing in 2004, was asked if he thought the truth would ever come out. He paused, then smiled faintly. "Truth?" he said. "Sometimes the truth isn't something you find, it's something that finds you. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the cold rolling waves off the coast of Maine, it's still waiting. The sea keeps its secrets well. But not forever. Because even now, on quiet nights when the wind dies down and the stars hang low over the water, fishermen swear they hear it, a faint pulse rising from the deep, a rhythm, a signal. As if something down there is waking up." 1972 prophecy predicted the end. What happened next is worse. It was the winter of 1972 when a quiet tremor passed through the small town of Black Hollow, nestled deep in the Appalachian foothills of eastern Kentucky. Snow had begun to fall early that December, blanketing the crooked rooftops and winding dirt roads in a hush so thick it seemed to muffle even thought itself. The air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the few residents who braved the cold moved with slow, deliberate steps, boots crunching over frost-laced gravel, breath curling into ghostly wisps beneath flickering porch lights. At the edge of town, near where the old railroad tracks disappeared into the misty woods, stood a crumbling stone chapel, long abandoned, save for the occasional drifter or curious teenager daring each other to go inside after dark. The chapel had once belonged to a short-lived religious sect known as the Covenant of the Final Dawn, a group that sprang up in the late 1960s, led by a man named Thaddeus Vale, whose sermons spoke not of salvation, but of reckoning. He claimed to have received visions during a near-fatal fever in the summer of 1968, visions of fire falling from the sky, of cities sinking into silence, of a great stillness descending upon the earth like a shroud. His followers, no more than 30 at their peak, built the chapel themselves using river stones and salvaged timber, believing it would serve as a sanctuary when the end came. And according to Vale's final prophecy, inscribed in charcoal on the chapel's inner wall just days before he vanished without a trace, the end would arrive precisely at 3:17 in the morning on December 21st, 1972. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now, nearly 5 decades later, the date stirs faint echoes in those who remember. Not because the world ended that night, but because something far more unsettling took place instead. Something that didn't make the newspapers, wasn't captured by radio signals, and left behind only whispers buried beneath layers of denial and disbelief. That evening, a handful of townspeople gathered at the general store, run then by Eldon Mirth, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a habit of speaking in riddles. He kept an old wind-up clock above the counter that never quite matched the time on anyone's wristwatch. By 7 o'clock, the store was unusually full. Minnie Galloway, the postmistress, sat knitting by the pot-bellied stove, her fingers trembling slightly as she looped the yarn. Young Corwin Bellwether, barely 16, leaned against the glass case of penny candy, staring out at the snowfall with a look of eerie calm. And in the back corner, nursing a cup of black coffee, sat Lyriel Crane, a woman who'd arrived in Black Hollow only weeks earlier, claiming to be researching local folklore for a university in Ohio. She wore a long wool coat, the color of dried blood, and her voice, when she spoke, was low and measured, like water moving under ice. They weren't there by accident. Each had heard the rumors. Some said Vale had returned. Others whispered that the ground beneath the chapel had begun to hum at night, vibrating like a plucked wire. A few children reported seeing figures standing among the tree's tall, thin shapes, with no faces, just smooth skin where features should be. And then there was the dream. Dozens of people across the county claimed to have had the same one within days of each other. A vast, silent field under a bruised purple sky, where rows of empty chairs stretched endlessly toward a horizon that pulsed like a heartbeat. In the dream, someone or something was waiting for them, but no one could remember who. At 9:42 p.m., the power went out. Not just in Black Hollow. Every home, every streetlight, every radio tower within a 30-mile radius lost electricity simultaneously. The darkness was absolute. No stars pierced the clouds. No moon cast its glow. Even the snow seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Inside the store, Eldon lit a kerosene lamp, its flame casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. No one spoke. Outside, the wind died. The snow stopped falling mid-air, suspended in glittering crystals that hung motionless between earth and sky. Then, at exactly 2:58 a.m., the clock above the counter began to chime. This was impossible. It was a wind-up clock. It hadn't worked properly in years, and yet it rang 12 times, each tone deep and resonant like a bell tolling underwater. When it finished, Lirael stood slowly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "It's starting," she said. Her voice did not waver. He wasn't wrong, he just misunderstood. No one moved. Corwin's hands clenched around the edge of the candy case. Minnie dropped her knitting, the needles clattering to the floor. Eldon stared at the clock, his face pale, lips parted as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. At 3:17 a.m., the exact moment prophesied, something shifted. It wasn't an explosion, not an earthquake, not even a sound at first. It was a sensation, as if the air itself had grown thinner, as if reality had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. The suspended snowflakes began to fall once more, but slowly, too slowly, like sand through an hourglass turned sideways. Then, from the direction of the chapel, a single note rose a tone so pure and high it made the teeth ache. It lasted only seconds before fading into silence. And then, the lights returned. Electricity surged back through the lines, radios crackled to life with static, the clock above the counter stopped chiming, frozen once more at 10 past 10. Outside, the snow fell normally, birds chirped in the trees. The world seemed unchanged. But it wasn't. Over the next few days, things began to unravel, not all at once, but in quiet, insidious ways. People reported missing hours. Corwin swore he'd walked to the chapel that night, though his boots were dry and untouched by snow. Minnie found letters in her mailbox addressed to people who had died years ago, written in handwriting she recognized but couldn't place. Eldon discovered that his wind-up clock now ran backward, its hands creeping counterclockwise with unnerving precision. And Lirael? She disappeared the next morning, leaving behind only a notebook filled with symbols and dates. Dates that stretched far beyond 1972, looping forward into the 21st century and beyond. One page bore a single sentence written in careful script. The end did not come. It arrived earlier, and we simply failed to notice. Black Hollow never recovered its sense of normalcy. Not really. Children born after that winter often spoke of dreams they couldn't explain, of standing in line, barefoot on cold stone, waiting to cross a bridge that led nowhere. Some grew up unable to feel fear. Others could not cry. A few claimed they remembered lives they'd never lived, names they'd never been given, cities that didn't exist on any map. The government eventually sent investigators, men in dark coats, who asked questions but took no notes. They visited the chapel, found nothing but dust and mildew, and declared the site structurally unsound. It was demolished in the spring of 1973. No records remain of what they may have seen or chosen to ignore. Yet, the strangest part isn't what happened that night, it's what continues to happen. Because every December 21st at precisely 3:17 in the morning, clocks across the region stop. Not all of them, just enough. And in homes near the old rail line, people wake suddenly, hearts pounding, convinced someone has just whispered their name, the air grows thick, breathing becomes difficult, and for exactly 13 seconds, the world feels hollow, as if something vital has been removed, replaced by a perfect, echoing absence. Scientists have offered theories, geomagnetic anomalies, infrasound waves, mass hallucination triggered by seasonal affective disorder, but none can explain why dogs refuse to bark during those seconds. Why newborns delivered at that exact time never cry. Why, in rare cases, individuals report seeing a figure standing at the foot of their bed, tall, gaunt, wearing a long coat, holding a notebook open in one hand, writing steadily with the other. And perhaps most chilling of all, why some who experience it claim to recognize the figure, not from photographs, not from stories, but from dreams. from memories that don't belong to them. In the years since, scattered accounts have surfaced: letters tucked into library books, audio recordings uploaded to obscure corners of the internet, diary entries found in attics after the owners have passed. All speak of the same phenomenon, all mention the date. All describe that 13th second, the pause in existence, the breath held too long, the sense that something ancient and patient is watching, waiting, counting. One such account came from a retired schoolteacher in rural Indiana, writing in 2015. I was only 6 when it happened, but I remember the silence. My mother used to say, the world stopped spinning for a moment. I didn't believe her until I felt it again last year. It's getting longer. Not much, maybe half a second more than before, but it's growing. And I hear them now, faintly, like voices through a wall. They're calling names, not ours, names from before. Another, a geologist working in New Mexico, recorded a series of seismic readings taken on December 21st, 2019. His instruments detected no earthquake, no tremor, just a single, isolated pulse of energy emanating from somewhere deep beneath the Appalachian Range. The waveform resembled nothing natural. It looked, he wrote, like a heartbeat, but one that shouldn't exist. And then there's the recording, widely dismissed as a hoax, that surfaced on a now-deleted podcast in 2022. It begins with ambient noise, wind, distant traffic, the rustle of fabric. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., everything cuts out. For 13 seconds, there is only silence. And then, just as abruptly, a voice, soft, genderless, speaking in perfect English with no discernible accent, says, "We are sorry, it must be this way. You were never meant to wake up." The recording ends there. To this day, no one knows who made it or why. But here's what no one wants to admit. The prophecy wasn't wrong. It was precise. The end did come on December 21st, 1972 at 3:17 in the morning. But it wasn't the end of the world. It was the end of reality, at least, the reality we believed we inhabited. What followed wasn't destruction. It was replacement, a subtle, seamless overwrite. Like changing film in a projector while the audience watches, unaware, the image has shifted. Those who felt it, the ones who woke in terror, who sensed the absence, who saw the figure in the coat, they're the ones who almost broke through. And the ones who remember fragments, who carry the weight of knowing something is deeply off, they're not crazy, they're the survivors of a transition no one else acknowledges. And the worst part? It's still happening. Every year, the pause grows. Not enough for most to notice. But for those sensitive to the shift, the ones who've always felt out of step with the world, who dream in colors that don't exist, who hear music when no one is playing, it's becoming harder to ignore. Time doesn't flow the way it used to. Memories blur at the edges. Faces in photographs seem subtly wrong. Loved ones sometimes speak with slight delays, as if echoing from a room just out of reach. And in the deepest hollows of Appalachia, where the trees grow too close together and the fog never quite lifts, locals still avoid the old rail path after midnight. Hunters refuse to camp near the ruins of the stone chapel. And on cold December nights, when the wind howls just right, some swear they can hear faint chanting words in no known language, rising from beneath the earth. They say Thaddeus Vale didn't vanish, he was taken, not killed, not imprisoned, but promoted, given a role in whatever lies beyond the veil. And the notebook Lyra left behind? It wasn't a record of the future, it was a ledger, a list of names, of souls who resisted the change, of those who might, one day, need to be corrected. So when you hear your clock tick strangely tonight, when your dog whimpers at nothing, when you wake suddenly, certain someone called your name, but no one's there, ask yourself, did the world survive 1972? Or did it merely continue pretending? The urban legend that locals swear is real and won't talk about at night. In the hollowed hills of northern West Virginia, where the trees grow thick and the valleys swallow sound like secrets never meant to be spoken, there's a stretch of road locals avoid after sundown. Not because it's dangerous in the usual way, no sharp curves, no history of accidents, but because something walks there. Something that doesn't belong. The road is called Hollow Creek Lane, winding through the unincorporated township of Gormley Mills, a place so small it doesn't appear on most maps, and so quiet that even birds seem reluctant to sing past twilight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late autumn in the year 1987 when the first official report came in, not to the sheriff's office, but whispered between neighbors over cracked porcelain cups of black coffee. A woman by the name of Thalia Mercer, who lived alone in a weather-worn clapboard house just off Hollow Creek Lane, claimed she saw a figure standing at the edge of her cornfield one evening. She said it wasn't tall, not exactly, but wrong its limbs too long, its head tilted at an angle that made her stomach twist. It didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood there, facing her porch, as if waiting for an invitation she had no intention of giving. Thalia was known in Gormley Mills as a practical woman church every Sunday, grew her own vegetables, kept a loaded 38 inches her nightstand since her husband passed in '69. So when she called Sheriff Harlan Voss 3 nights later, voice trembling like a plucked wire, he listened. He arrived with his flashlight cutting through the fog, boots crunching on frost-laced gravel. The house was dark except for a single lamp glowing behind the kitchen curtain. Thalia met him at the door, wrapped in a faded quilt, eyes wide and bloodshot. "It's back," she whispered. "Same spot, in the field." They walked together toward the edge of the property, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the mist. Nothing moved, no footprints in the damp soil, no snapped branches or disturbed earth. Just silence, thick and heavy, like wool pressed against the ears. Then, from somewhere deep in the corn rows, a sound. A low, wet clicking, like stones being rolled in oil. Sheriff Voss aimed the light, the stalks swayed slightly, though there was no wind, and then nothing. The sound stopped. The air stilled. They stood there for nearly 10 minutes, neither speaking, both feeling watched. Sheriff Voss told Thalia to stay indoors, lock the doors, and call him if anything changed. He drove away slowly, scanning the rearview mirror until the house disappeared behind the trees. He filed a report the next morning, possible hallucination due to stress or sleep deprivation, but privately he marked a note in his personal ledger, Hollow Creek, November 3rd, Thalia Mercer. Heard something, felt something, can't explain. That winter was harsh, long stretches of snow, power outages, roads blocked for days. But people in Gormley Mills noticed other things too. Dogs refused to go into backyards after dark. Chickens vanished without signs of struggle. And on still nights, when the moon hung low and yellow, some swore they heard voices calling from the woods, voices that didn't sound human. Children were kept inside after 6, porch lights stayed on all night. Conversations about Hollow Creek Lane ended quickly, often with a shake of the head and a muttered phrase, "Best not talk about it." Then, in early spring of 1988, a teenager named Corwin Bellwether went missing. He was 16, lanky, with a stutter he'd been trying to overcome since childhood. Corwin liked to walk at night, said it helped him think. His mother, Elspeth, would beg him not to go down Hollow Creek Lane, but he always shrugged and said, "Nothing out there but trees and dirt." On the night of March 14th, he left after dinner with a notebook in his pocket, claiming he was writing poetry for school. He never came back. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. Bloodhounds picked up his scent near the creek bed, then lost it abruptly, as if he'd stepped off the face of the earth. A week later, his boots were found placed neatly side by side at the base of an old sycamore, roots tangled like knuckles. No body, no blood, no explanation. The official cause of disappearance? Presumed runaway. But in Gormley Mills, folks knew better. They looked at each other in church pews, eyes shadowed, lips tight. They didn't say much. But they stopped walking that road entirely. Years passed, the story faded mostly. New families moved into the valley, drawn by cheap land and quiet living. They laughed at the old tales. Ghosts, they'd say. Come on. But then, little things started happening. Lights flickering in empty rooms, cold spots in hallways. One woman, Miriam Huxley, claimed she saw a figure in her bathroom mirror one night, a man with sunken eyes and a mouth sewn shut with black thread. She screamed, turned on the light, and it was gone. The next morning, she found a single muddy footprint on the linoleum leading from the bathtub to the door, but the windows were locked. The house had no basement access. In 2005, a documentary crew from Pittsburgh arrived, determined to debunk the myth. They set up cameras along Hollow Creek Lane, motion sensors, audio recorders. For 2 nights, nothing. On the third, at precisely 2:13 in the morning, every device failed simultaneously. The footage showed only static, but audio captured a whisper, faint at first, then clearer. You're not supposed to see. When the lead technician reviewed the files, he noticed something else. In the background, beneath the static, a rhythmic tapping 3 slow knocks, pause, then 2 quick ones, like a code or a warning. He played it for an elderly resident named Otis Grindle, who'd lived in Gormley Mills his entire life. Otis listened once, turned pale, and said, "That's how they used to signal before the mine collapsed in '49. Only the men trapped underground knew that pattern." He refused to speak another word on the subject. By 2012, Hollow Creek Lane was officially closed. The county put up a rusted gate, chained and padlocked, with a sign that read, "Road closed. No trespassing." But kids still dared each other to go. Teens from nearby towns would drive up on weekends, flashlights in hand, laughing nervously as they approached the gate. Most turned back before reaching the tree line. But a few went further. One such group, in October of 2017, included a boy named Jory Linthwaite. He was 17, curious, raised on horror films and internet creepypastas. He didn't believe in ghosts, he believed in adrenaline. That night, he and 3 friends cut the chain with bolt cutters and slipped through. They brought cameras, a Ouija board, even a EVP recorder. They set up camp near the old sycamore where Corwin's boots were found. At first, it was jokes. Flashlight beams dancing through the trees, mocking whispers. Then, around 1 o'clock, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath came out in thick clouds. Their phones died, one by one. Then the recorder picked up a voice, clear, childlike, but distorted. "Don't look behind you." All 4 spun around. Nothing there. But when they turned back, the Ouija board planchette had moved on its own, spelling "Leave now." They packed up fast. As they ran toward the gate, Jory tripped. His friends thought he'd caught his foot on a root, but when they stopped and turned, Jory wasn't getting up. He was staring into the trees, mouth open, eyes wide with terror. "It's watching," he whispered. "It's smiling." They pulled him up, half dragging him the rest of the way. The chain was intact again, no sign it had ever been cut. Jory didn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he described a face pale, stretched, with too many teeth. He said it stood between the trees, perfectly still, just smiling. And then, in a voice not his own, he said, "It knows my name." After that, the county welded the gate shut, installed surveillance cameras. Within a week, all 4 cameras malfunctioned. Footage showed nothing but snow, even though the night was clear. And in the corner of one frame, barely visible, a shadow tall, thin, with fingers too long to be real, reached slowly toward the lens. To this day, residents of Gormley Mills won't go near Hollow Creek Lane after dark. If you ask them why, they'll change the subject, or give you a look one that says, "You don't want to know." But if you visit in late autumn, when the leaves turn brittle and the wind carries the scent of damp earth and decay, stand at the edge of that road at dusk. Listen, really listen. You might hear the faintest echo of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. You might feel the air thicken, your breath shorten, your skin prickle as if unseen eyes have settled on you. And if you're foolish enough to step past the gate, to walk just a few yards down that cracked asphalt path, you may notice something worse. The silence isn't empty. It's waiting. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the moon hides behind clouds and the world holds its breath, you can hear it breathe back. They say it mimics voices. Calls out names in familiar tones, your mother's lullaby, your best friend's laugh, just to lure you deeper. But those who've heard it warn, don't answer, don't turn. Don't even think about looking back. Because once it has your attention, it never lets go. There's a reason the elders in Gormley Mills whisper prayers before bedtime, why parents check their children's windows twice, why on certain nights the entire town seems to go dark at once, as if hiding. It's not superstition. It's survival. And if you find yourself near Hollow Creek Lane when the clock strikes midnight, remember this. The stories aren't legends. They're warnings. And the thing in the woods? It remembers every person who didn't listen. Even now, in the hush between heartbeats, in the space where shadows grow longer than they should, something stirs. Not far, Not loud, but close enough to hear you breathe. So tell me again, where are you listening from? And more importantly, are you alone? This desert town exists to hide something. The night siren proves it. The sun had long since collapsed behind the jagged teeth of the Sierra Lamitas, painting the sky in bruised purples and fading oranges, when Elias Thorne first stepped onto the cracked asphalt of Drywater Junction. The air hung thick with dust and silence so deep it pressed against the eardrums like cotton soaked in oil. No crickets, no wind, not even the distant hum of a generator broke the stillness. Just the soft crunch of Elias's boots on gravel and the slow creak of a rusted sign above him that read, "Welcome to Drywater Population 17." That number, he would later learn, was not quite accurate and never had been. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late September in the year 1997 when Elias arrived, a geologist contracted by the Bureau of Land Management to assess subsurface erosion patterns near the Mojave Fringe. He wasn't supposed to stay longer than 3 days. But Drywater had other plans. The town clung to the edge of the desert like a scab, refusing to heal wooden shacks leaning at odd angles, their windows boarded or shattered, paint peeled into ghostly curls. A single gas station stood open, its fluorescent light flickering like a dying heartbeat. Behind the counter sat a man named Orrin Vexley, gaunt as a scarecrow, eyes milky with cataracts that didn't quite hide the sharpness beneath. He handed Elias a room key without asking for ID, without smiling, and said only, "Don't go out after sundown, especially if you hear the siren." "I think the same." Elias laughed, then nervously, more out of discomfort than disbelief. "Siren? Like an air raid?" Orrin didn't blink, like nothing you've heard, and once you do, it stays with you, in your bones. That night, Elias lay on a lumpy cot in room 4 of the Dustvale Motel, the ceiling fan turning with a lazy metallic groan. Outside, the moon hung low and yellow, casting long shadows that seemed too tall, too thin, to belong to any natural object. He'd just closed his eyes when it came a sound so unnatural it froze the breath in his lungs. It began faintly, like whine through a canyon, but quickly swelled into a high-pitched wail, melodic yet dissonant, rising and falling in intervals that defied human tuning. It wasn't electronic. It wasn't animal. It carried weight, like something ancient being dragged across stone. The siren pulsed through the walls, vibrating the glass in the window, making the metal bedframe hum. And beneath it, almost imperceptible, were voices whispering, overlapping, speaking in no language Elias recognized, yet somehow understood in flashes. "They watch from below," one seemed to say. The hollow ones, remember. He bolted upright, heart hammering, sweat slick on his neck. He reached for the lamp, knocking over a glass of water. The siren stopped instantly. Silence crashed back like a slammed door. No birds, no footsteps, nothing. He waited nearly an hour before daring to peer outside. The street was empty, but in the dirt beside the motel's foundation, something caught his eye: footprints. Small, barefoot, too narrow to be human. They led from the edge of the lot toward the dry riverbed, vanishing where the sand turned black and glassy, as if scorched by fire. The next morning, Elias tried to ask about the siren at the diner, the Rust Spoon, a dim place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. A woman named Merelda Cray sat nursing a cup, her hair pulled back so tightly it made her cheekbones look like knife edges. She looked up when Elias mentioned the sound. "You heard it," she said flatly, not a question. "I did. What is it? Some kind of test? Military?" Merelda set her spoon down with a click. "The siren calls them, brings them closer. We used to have a curfew during the war, World War II, 1943, when the army came through. Built something underground, said it was radar, but the siren started then. First time, then stopped for years, came back in 1978, again in 1989. And now it sings every few nights." Elias frowned. "Who built it?" She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Not who, what? They weren't soldiers, not all of them. Some wore uniforms, yes, but others moved wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. One of them, he had no shadow." Elias wanted to dismiss her as paranoid, superstitious, but the footprints, the silence, the way the townspeople avoided certain streets after dark. And Orrin, when questioned, simply muttered, "We keep the lights off, we don't answer doors, and we never ever whistle at night." Curiosity became obsession. Over the next week, Elias combed through the county archives in nearby Blythe, though most records from the mid-20th century were missing or burned. What he found instead were fragments, a classified project codenamed Operation Hollow Veil, referenced in a declassified memo from the Department of Defense dated March of 1944. Mentioned briefly, acoustic resonance experiments conducted in isolated zones intended to disrupt enemy signal propagation, but the location was redacted. Only a grid coordinate remained, plotted directly beneath Drywater Junction. He returned with a ground-penetrating radar unit borrowed under false pretenses. Working under cover of darkness, he scanned the area near the old rail spur, half a mile east of town. At a depth of 230 feet, the machine picked up a vast hollow chamber circular, approximately 300 yards in diameter. And inside, intermittent pulses of energy, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Then, on the seventh night, the siren returned, louder than before. This time, Elias was ready. He recorded it on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind used for field seismology. As the sound poured from the speakers in his motel room, slowed to half speed, the whispers emerged clearer. Not words, more like impressions, layered beneath the tone. "We sleep beneath the salt," one seemed to convey. "The door must not open. The watcher is blind, but listens." And then, just before the tape ended, a child's voice, soft, trembling, said, "Daddy, why won't the stars come back?" Elias sat frozen, because that voice, he knew it. His own daughter, Lyra, had spoken those exact words the night before she died in a car accident 2 years prior, words never recorded, never shared with anyone. How could a desert town in California know that? He confronted Orrin the next day, waving the tape. "What is this place? What are you hiding?" Orrin stared at the device, then slowly reached under the counter. He placed a small object on the glass, a rusted metal disc, etched with symbols that looked neither human nor machine-made. Angular. Flowing. Alive. "This was found in the shaft," Orrin said. 1951. By a miner named Heston Pike. He went mad within a week. Spent his last days scratching equations on his cell walls. Said the siren wasn't a warning, it was a lullaby, meant to keep something asleep. Elias's hands trembled. Asleep? Orrin nodded. Underground. Beneath the old test site. The government thought they were building a bunker, but they weren't digging down, they were uncovering something that was already there. Long before us. Long before anything. And the siren? Elias whispered. It sings to it, calms it. When the power fails, or when someone like you pokes too hard, the song fades, and it stirs. That night, the electricity cut out across Drywater. No explanation, no surge, just darkness. Elias stood at his window, watching. Every house was dark, except one. A small cottage at the edge of town, its porch light blinking in a pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code? SOS. But no one went to help. Instead, doors locked, windows shuttered, and from somewhere far below, a deep subsonic rumble began, felt more than heard, like the earth itself grinding its teeth. Then, faint at first, the siren rose again, this time not from the town, but from beneath it. And this time, it wasn't singing to keep something asleep. It was screaming because it had woken up. Elias grabbed his gear and ran for his truck. But as he turned the key, the engine wouldn't catch. Again. Again. Nothing. He looked up and froze. Standing in the middle of the road, silhouetted by the pale moon, was a figure. Tall. Thin. Limbs too long, moving with a jerking grace, like a puppet tested by invisible strings. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, until it faced him. No face. Just smooth skin, stretched tight. And from its chest, where a heart should be the siren's melody, pulsed outward, vibrating the air, distorting the light. Elias stumbled back, falling against the truck. He fumbled for the tape recorder, pressed play. His daughter's voice echoed into the night. "Daddy, why won't the stars come back?" The figure paused. Then, in a voice that was not a voice, more like dozens of whispers threaded through metal, it replied, "Because we ate them." Elias didn't scream. He couldn't. his throat sealed shut, his lungs locked. The thing stepped forward, each movement accompanied by a soft chime, like glass bells underwater. But then, faint at first, a new sound joined the chorus. From the gas station, Oren had climbed onto the roof. In his hands, a battered horn, an old railroad signal, rusted and dented. He blew into it with all his strength. A deep, mournful note rolled across the desert. The figure stopped, turned. Another blast, and another. From other houses, lights flickered on, not electric oil lamps, candles. People emerged, carrying instruments, tin whistles, hand drums, a warped violin. They formed a circle around the edge of town and began to play not music, but a complex sequence of tones rising and falling in precise patterns. The siren from beneath the earth faltered. The figure twitched, then slowly, painfully sank to its knees. Its form blurred like heat over asphalt and then collapsed into a pile of fine gray ash. Silence returned, but not peace. Oren approached Elias, breathing heavily, the horn dangling from his fingers. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "Now it knows your voice, knows your grief. It'll call to you again. In dreams, in static, in the silence between radio stations." Elias swallowed. "What was that thing?" "A scout," Oren said. "A listener, sent ahead. If the song stops for too long, they send more, and if the song dies completely, he didn't finish." "What happens?" Oren looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn stained the sky blood red. "The sky goes dark, not at night, forever, and the ones below climb up." Elias left Drywater the next morning. Officially, he filed a report citing geological instability and abandoned infrastructure. Unofficially, he destroyed the tapes, except one. The one with his daughter's voice. He kept that buried in a safe behind a false wall in his Denver apartment. But sometimes, on still nights when the power blinks, he hears it, a faint, melodic wail, coming not from outside, but from within the walls. And when he presses his ear to the plaster, he doesn't hear the siren. He hears knocking. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Then a whisper. "Let us sing you to sleep." To this day, no satellite imagery shows Drywater Junction clearly. Clouds always seem to gather above it, even in drought. GPS signals fail within a 5-mile radius. And travelers who claim to have passed through often cannot recall the name of the town, only the silence, only the feeling of being watched from below. And if you drive through the Mojave after midnight and your radio begins to crackle with a strange, haunting tone, do not stop, do not listen, do not answer if something calls your name in a voice you once loved. Because some towns exist not to welcome, but to warn. And Drywater is still singing. A ghost ship drifted into port with a fresh meal on the stove. It was the winter of 1987 when the fishing trawler Marianne V slipped silently into the harbor of Gloucester, Massachusetts, just before dawn on a brittle February morning. No lights flickered from her deck, no voices called out, no radio signals preceded her arrival. She came like a shadow drifting through fog, her bow nudging gently against Pier 6 as if guided by unseen hands. The first to notice her was Elias Thorne, a weathered dockhand with 40 years of salt in his bones and frost still clinging to the brim of his wool cap. He'd arrived early to check lobster traps, steam rising from his coffee cup curling into the pale gray sky. When he saw the vessel listing slightly, paint peeling like old skin, name barely legible beneath grime, he froze. His breath caught, not from cold, but from instinct. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. "Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there?" Elias approached slowly, boots crunching over frozen patches of seaweed and ice. The Marianne V had been reported missing 3 weeks prior, last seen off the Georges Bank during a sudden nor'easter that had swallowed 2 other boats whole. The Coast Guard had called off search efforts after 10 days, assuming all hands lost, and yet here she was, intact, afloat, and strangely, undisturbed. No signs of storm damage, no gaping holes in the hull, nothing overturned on deck, just silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed against Elias's ears like cotton. He called out once, twice, no answer. Then, steeling himself, he climbed aboard. The moment his boot touched the deck, he felt it a chill that wasn't from the wind. It coiled up from the wood beneath him, sharp and unnatural, as though the ship itself were holding its breath. He moved toward the wheelhouse. The door hung open, swaying slightly with the motion of the tide. Inside, the radio crackled with static, a faint loop of Morse code repeating endlessly 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS, over and over, though the power should have been dead. The logbook lay open on the chart table, the last entry dated February 3rd. Heavy fog. Currents erratic. Can't see land. Something in the water. The handwriting grew jagged, frantic, as if written under duress. Elias flipped back a few pages. Earlier entries spoke of routine hauls, calm seas, even jokes about Captain Rourke's terrible stew. But then, around January 28th, the tone shifted. Crew restless. Emery claims he saw lights beneath the surface, not bioluminescence, too steady, too deep. Emery Vale, third mate, quiet man from inland Maine who rarely spoke unless spoken to. He'd joined the crew only 2 months prior, replacing a man who'd quit mid-season, saying the boat felt haunted. Emery hadn't believed in ghosts, or so the others said. But his journal, found later tucked inside a duffel bag below decks, told a different story. Elias descended the narrow metal stairs into the galley, flashlight beam trembling in his grip, and there, on the cast iron stove, sat a pot, still warm. Steam curled lazily from its cracked lid, carrying the scent of onions, potatoes, and something meaty beef, maybe, or pork. A spoon rested against the rim, crusted with congealing gravy. Beside it, a chipped blue mug held tea, long gone cold, but unmistakably brewed that morning. Or the night before. Or whenever. Time didn't seem to matter here. He backed away, heart hammering. No one could have boarded without being seen. The harbor was monitored, no small craft had entered after midnight, and yet the meal was fresh. As if someone had stepped away just seconds ago. Then he heard it. A soft clink. From the mess hall, like a fork tapping a plate. He turned slowly. The door stood ajar. Darkness pooled beyond it. He pushed it open with the toe of his boot. Tables bolted to the floor. Benches intact. Nothing out of place. Except on the farthest table, set for four plates, each with a portion of stew untouched, forks laid neatly beside them, napkins folded, salt and pepper shakers aligned perfectly. And at the head of the table, a fifth plate. Empty. But the chair was pulled out. As if someone had just risen. Elias didn't scream, he didn't run, he simply stood there, flashlight shaking, breath coming in short white puffs, until the sound came, again not a clink this time, but a whisper, faint, guttural, from the sleeping quarters below. He didn't go down, not then. He scrambled back onto the pier, shouting for help, voice raw with panic. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, the pot on the stove was cold, the steam had vanished. But the stew remained, uneaten, perfectly preserved, as if time had paused mid-bite. Captain Silas Rourke, grizzled veteran of 30 seasons at sea, was never found. Nor were his 3 crewmen, Emery Vale, Harlan Pike, and Jocelyn Crow, the youngest at 23, who'd signed on to save money for nursing school in Portland. Their personal effects were still in their bunks. Photos of family, letters half-written, toothbrushes damp. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just absence. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Divers scoured the hull, sonar scanned the seabed, forensic teams analyzed the stew, confirmed it contained beef, carrots, and barley, cooked within hours of the ship's arrival. No toxins, no hallucinogens, nothing abnormal. Yet every sailor who boarded the Marianne V afterward reported the same thing. The smell of cooking food, even when the stove was cold, the sensation of being watched from empty rooms, whispers in low, guttural tones, always just beyond hearing. One junior officer, Lyle Mander, claimed he saw Emery Vale standing at the railing at 3:17 in the morning, staring into the fog, mouthing words he couldn't understand. When approached, the figure dissolved like mist. The ship was towed to dry dock, declared unsalvageable not due to structural damage, but because morale among crews plummeted. Men refused to work on her. Mechanics reported tools going missing, only to reappear in locked lockers. Electricians swore lights turned on by themselves, dim and flickering, casting long shadows that moved against the walls. By April, the decision was made. The Marianne V would be scuttled, sunk in deep water beyond the continental shelf, where currents would carry her far from shipping lanes. The ceremony was brief. No flags, no speeches, just a single flare shot into the twilight sky as charges detonated along her keel. She sank slowly, bow first, vanishing beneath the waves with an almost ceremonial grace. But here's what they didn't report, what never made the official logs. 3 days later, a Norwegian freighter, the Fjordwind, radioed the Boston Maritime Authority from 50 miles east of Sable Island. They'd spotted wreckage, part of a wooden table, scorched at the edges, floating amid a slick of oil. Attached to it, miraculously preserved in a sealed plastic sleeve, was a page torn from Emery Vale's journal. The handwriting was frantic, ink smudged as if written in haste or fear. "They're not dead. We never left. The ship doesn't sink. It drifts, it waits, it feeds. The stove is always warm, the table is always set, and one day it will come back. With a fresh meal. For us." The page was authenticated, handwriting matched samples from Emery's personnel file, ink consistent with pens issued to crew, but how it survived explosion, fire, and ocean pressure, no scientist could explain. And then, on the evening of December 9th, 2012, a local fisherman named Corwin Haskins reported seeing a vessel matching the Marianne V's description near Jeffrey's Ledge. Fog was heavy that night, visibility near zero. He claimed the ship passed within 20 feet of his boat, lights dark, decks empty. But from her galley window, a yellow glow pulsed like a stove lit below. He tried hailing her, no response. When he turned to grab his radio, she was gone. Vanished into the mist. No wreckage was found, no trace on radar. The Coast Guard dismissed it as a mirage, a trick of the light. But Corwin insisted, said he smelled stew in the air, beef, carrots, barley, and underneath something darker, metallic, like blood. To this day, Gloucester fishermen avoid that stretch of water after sunset, especially in winter, especially when the fog rolls in thick and silent. Some say if you listen closely on still nights, you can hear the Morse code 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots echoing from beneath the waves. Others claim to see a faint glow beneath the surface, drifting with the current like a lantern in the deep. And every year, around February 10th, a single bouquet of wilted wildflowers appears on the railing of Pier 6. No note, no signature. Just flowers brown at the edges, salt stiffened, as if carried across the sea. Left there, some say, by someone who never came home. But perhaps the most unsettling detail, the one that lingers in the mind long after the story ends, is this. When authorities finally cleaned out the galley before scuttling the ship, they found something odd in the cupboard. A can of stew. Store-bought, label faded, best before date, October 12th, 1986. Expired over a year earlier, yet the can was warm to the touch. And when opened, it was full. Steaming. Fresh. As if just heated. No one ate it. It was incinerated along with the rest. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right through the rigging of moored boats, people swear they can smell it, that rich, savory aroma. Onions, potatoes, meat slow-cooked for hours. And they wonder, who was it meant for? And more importantly, is the table still set? The sea keeps its secrets well, but every now and then, it returns them to drift into port, unannounced, uninvited, with a fresh meal on the stove and chairs waiting to be filled. So the next time you walk past an empty dock and the wind carries the faint scent of cooking food, ask yourself, was that the neighbor's dinner? Or something else? Something older? Something hungrier? Something that remembers your name and knows when you'll be home?
The stories. This abandoned cabin blueprint exposed a secret crawlspace. The cabin looked ordinary in photos, yet the archived blueprint flagged one space that did not exist on site. Local records listed a one-bedroom layout, but the drawing showed a narrow service void marked beneath the living room. Silas Bergen was 36, and he worked as a county compliance inspector who handled delinquent properties before auction. He drove out on a gray weekday to walk the structure, photograph hazards, and confirm that the layout matched the file. The place sat off a 2-lane road that wound through pines with a creek down behind the lot. The roofline sagged over a porch stripped of rails, and the windows held plastic sheeting taped from the inside. He unlocked the door with a temporary code from asset management, and he called out to clear the space. The air smelled like wet wood and dust, and a fleck of ash drifted when he stepped on a warped plank. His plan was simple: walk clockwise and document each room, then compare notes to the blueprint. He had a body cam that synced to a phone, and he kept a paper checklist clipped to a thin clipboard. The front room matched the drawing in size, yet the joists underneath felt different when he tapped the floor. The sound was dull near the hearth, then strangely hollow near the wall that faced the porch. He paused and studied the print, which carried a date stamp from 1996 and a contractor name. The sheet showed a 6-foot by 3-foot chase for ducting, labeled unfinished, with access from a panel. There was no panel visible, and there were no vents large enough to match the dimensions. He measured along the baseboard with a tape, then marked the chalk line where the void should begin. Silas had done 100 inspections, and he knew when a wall tried to hide something. He set a small level against the trim, then noticed the paint edge looked newer than the room around it. He kept going through the kitchen, where a backed-up sink had left a ring around the basin. A calendar on the wall had pages stuck together, all from 2002, with a fishing cartoon printed on top. He took photos of the wiring, which showed cloth wrap at the outlets, and a modern breaker added later. The breaker ran a separate conduit along the sill, then vanished behind the same living room wall. That mismatch bothered him, so he called the records clerk who had pulled the blueprint the day before. She was retired, but still contracted hourly, and she said the sheet came from a permit request that was never finalized. She added one strange footnote from the parcel folder, which she read out in a careful voice. A handwritten note stated that a neighboring caller reported periodic hammering at night, then sudden silence before daybreak. Silas thanked her, then he checked the porch wall again, and he laid on the floor to sight the baseboard. A thin seam ran under the lowest plank, and a pothook sat on the floor beside the hearth bricks. He tugged the hook, and nothing moved, but the plank next to it shifted slightly when he leaned. He slipped a pry bar under the edge and felt the hidden nail heads give a little under pressure. He stopped and photographed everything, then he made a note to treat the space like a confined area. He lifted the plank a few inches, and the smell from below was cool and mineral, like a cellar after rain. A rectangular cavity dropped 4 feet, then leveled into a crawl space that ran along the living room footprint. The sides were lined with old plywood, and someone had stapled foil-faced insulation in a patchwork grid. He climbed down with gloves, then took a careful crawl on elbows while the body cam light cut the darkness. Dust turned to packed silt, and the foil rustled against his jacket whenever his shoulder grazed the wall. 5 feet in, the crawl space opened into a small wedge where 2 joists had been doubled. A wire ran across the wedge and disappeared through a hole toward the porch, wrapped in black electrical tape. He traced the wire with a finger, then backed out and stepped onto the porch to search for the exit. The wire emerged under the porch bench, fed into a steel box, and terminated at what looked like a switch. The switch was taped into the off position, and the tape had a date written on it, 2005. Next to the switch, a second small box sat empty, with screw marks around a rectangle that once held something. He documented both boxes, then returned to the living room and eased into the void again. The path hooked left and began to slope down, as if someone had carved a shallow ramp under the wall. At the bottom of the ramp, he found a round hole cut cleanly through a concrete footing. The edge had been brushed with some kind of sealant, and faint black scuffs ran along the rim like scrape marks. He slid his phone through the hole and snapped a burst of shots while the flash bounced off damp earth. The images showed a low chamber beyond, supported by sandbags, with a lattice of pallets stacked into a platform. He measured the diameter of the hole with the tape, then radioed his office line to note the confined entry. He did not squeeze through, but he reached his arm further and felt air moving from the chamber. That air smelled like creek water and old leaves, which suggested a connection to the drainage cut behind the lot. He crawled out and circled the property line until he reached the bank where the creek curved north. There, he found a culvert from the road ditch that emptied toward the creek, with riprap hiding several small cavities. One cavity had a plywood face painted to match the stones, and the bottom edge hung loose in the mud. Silas lifted the panel and saw the pallet lattice that matched his phone photos from the interior side. It formed a short tunnel that led back toward the footing hole, shielded from view by the stones and brush. He photographed the culvert from the roadside, then returned to the porch and sat on the step to think. The blueprint had shown a void, and here it was, but the finishing work suggested someone had expanded it well beyond code. Before he called anyone, he walked next door to the only occupied house, a retired welder named Arlen Pike. Arlen was 70, and he looked careful the way men do after years of measuring metal with their eyes. Arlen said the cabin had belonged to a seasonal caretaker who used to plow the track in winter. He remembered hearing light clanking late on some nights, like tools hitting pipe, then a truck idling near the turnout. Silas asked if anyone had lived there after the caretaker left, and Arlen shook his head. He said the place sat empty for years, then one spring, the porch got new paint, and then the power went off again. Arlen added that the road had seen a string of petty thefts around 2005, according to a local newsletter. Coolers, gas cans, and toolboxes disappeared from pickups at the turnout while people hiked the trail. Back inside, Silas opened the kitchen drawer that held mailers, and he found a utility notice dated 2005. The notice warned of irregular off-peak usage with spikes overnight that did not fit seasonal patterns. He called the utility office and asked for the archived meter notes, which a supervisor read while on speaker. The notes recorded low daytime load, then narrow spikes around midnight, and a flag that led to a field check. According to the supervisor, the field tech reported the panel was locked, yet an extra breaker ran to an unknown device. The tech noted a switch near the porch that controlled a separate line, which the owner had taped off. Silas thanked them and returned to the crawlspace, then placed a small magnet near the taped switch. The switch held power after the breaker, so the taped position likely disabled the line that fed the tunnel area. He considered why someone would build a clean conduit between a culvert and a living room. It could be smuggling, or a shady storm shelter, or a quiet way to enter and exit without a porch light turning on. He called the records clerk again and asked if the blueprint contractor had ever filed completion documents. She said the contractor died in 2004 and no one else filed amendments, which left the void uninspected. Silas pulled county incident logs from a public terminal at the office, then filtered for the turnout mile marker. Several entries from 2003 to 2005 mentioned car break-ins during trail hours. One dispatcher note mentioned a caller who thought someone moved under the road's surface near the culvert stones. The caller said the stones rattled like a grate being shifted, then a flashlight beam flickered out toward the creek. Silas visited the small volunteer station where a retired dispatcher still came in to organize training materials. She remembered a prank call trend that year, but she also remembered one credible tip from a hiker who left a name. The hiker, whose name he will not repeat, reported hearing a handheld scanner from inside the culvert during a busy weekend. The voice read license plates quietly, then said clear when a driver left a truck unlocked near the turnout. Back at the cabin, Silas checked the crawl again, and this time he saw faint letters printed on the foil facing. The letters matched a brand of insulated soundboard used in rehearsal rooms to dampen noise without thick walls. He scanned the chamber beyond the footing hole one more time and noticed zip tie heads gleaming along the pallet edges. The ties secured a cable run that likely held a small camera at culvert height aimed at the turnout path. He followed the cable to a break near the pallet mouth where critters had chewed through and left frayed copper. There, he also found a torn plastic sleeve that once held memory cards stuck in the silt beside the beam. Silas collected nothing, but he documented every detail from 4 angles, then filed a report that afternoon. The report asked for a confined space entry team to clear the chamber, then to photograph any equipment left inside. The team scheduled for the next morning, and Silas returned to watch them work while he stood above the crawl. They suited up with masks, slid in carefully, and passed up 4 items, all tagged and bagged for inventory. The items included a small VHF scanner, a smashed action camera, a handwritten log, and a lock with a cut shackle. The log listed dates, truck descriptions, and short notes like cooler, gas can, or tool chest, all marked with times. At the bottom of the log, a few lines mentioned a code word he had heard on the dispatcher note. The writer kept track of the word clear after reading a plate quietly, which matched the hiker account from that season. Silas wrote an addendum that evening that tied the blueprint to the crawlspace and the culvert method. He mapped the route from turnout to pallet chamber, then to the footing hole and the living room lift point. It was crude, yet it was efficient for someone who needed to vanish when headlights turned down the road. A person could slip under the riprap, cut the feed with the switch, stash gear, then rise through the floor and wait out patrols. 2 weeks later, the county closed the chamber with concrete, and asset management stripped the porch to studs. No charges appear in public record related to the log, which suggests the writer was either gone or unidentifiable. Arlen watched the work from his fence and said it explained the trucks that idled without drivers toward midnight. He said he had chalked it up to fishermen, but the old culvert trick made more sense when joined to the blueprint. Silas requested the utility to send him a copy of their night spike graph for his file notes. The graph showed narrow peaks around midnight, which matched the switch relay cycling, while equipment ran briefly under the floor. Years later, people still hike that turnout, and most know nothing about the pallet chamber under the stones. The cabin has new owners who kept the footprint, yet they asked the county to certify the slab as filled and sealed. The story holds because the file trail fits together and the parts line up with patient logic rather than thrill. A retired dispatcher kept the hand note that matched the log, and a utility supervisor verified the meter pattern. Silas keeps a copy of the 1996 blueprint in a drawer, with the void circled and dated in fresh ink. He says the strangest things in his job are the simplest, like a floor that sounds wrong when you tap it carefully. He never found a name to attach to the log, and there was no need to guess beyond the evidence. It took a thrift store scanner, a pallet stack, and a switch by a porch bench to run a silent route. The blueprint did not expose a treasure, and there was no buried room filled with cash, which makes it credible. It revealed a crawl space that served as a passage, built after a contractor died, and used for quick escapes. If anyone asks why the story stayed quiet, the answer is practical, and it does not involve secrecy or fear. The chamber is sealed, the turnout is patrolled, and the lesson remains written on a sheet that outlived its builder. He still taps floors on inspections and listens for that hollow change that means someone altered a plan. Most houses tell on themselves if you let them, and a blueprint can whisper where a person once chose to hide.